About Audie Murphy, they often see the young soldier who became the most decorated American combat veteran of World War II. They remember the man who stood against impossible odds, who carried the weight of battles most could not survive, and who later turned that fame into a career in Hollywood. But behind those medals and movies, there was a man who carried wounds that were not always visible. Audie Murphy's son, Terry Murphy, grew up with a father who was both larger than life and painfully human. He was a man trapped between the image the world demanded and the struggles that haunted him privately. For decades, much of that truth remained hidden because Audie himself rarely spoke about it. His silence left questions behind, and only now do we begin to see what he was truly carrying. The hidden truth about Audie Murphy is not just about bravery, it is about the price of that bravery. It is about a man who lived through nightmares and then had to face the cruel reality that those nightmares never really ended. His son's words open a window into a story that was buried under fame, silence, and pain. It is a story of a father who was celebrated by millions, yet often misunderstood by those closest to him. Audie was born in 1925 in Kingston, Texas. His childhood was one of struggle, poverty, and responsibility. By the time he was a teenager, he had become the main provider for his family, hunting rabbits and doing whatever work he could find. Life taught him hardness early, but it also carved out resilience that would later define him. This was not the glamorous life of a Hollywood hero. It was survival, pure and simple. When World War II broke out, Audie was just a boy, barely 16, but he lied about his age to enlist. The army eventually accepted him, and what followed was a series of battles that would turn his name into legend. He fought in Sicily, Italy, and France. He stormed through fields where bullets rained like storms, and he stood firm when others fell. By the end of the war, he had received every major combat award the United States could give. The most famous moment came in January 1945, when Audie held off an entire company of German soldiers single-handedly. He climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, firing its machine gun for nearly an hour, despite being wounded, and stopped the enemy's advance. This act earned him the Medal of Honor, but it also earned him scars he would never escape. His son would later say that those moments never left him, even after the applause stopped. What people often forget is that Audie Murphy was still just 20 years old when he came home from war. He was a boy who had lived through hell. The parades and cheers were loud, but when the noise faded, he was left alone with his memories. His son remembers the quiet, restless nights, the shadows under his father's eyes, and the distance that trauma created. The war was over for the world, but not for Audie. Hollywood quickly came calling. His boyish looks and heroic story made him a natural choice for war films. He starred in more than 40 movies, including To Hell and Back, where he played himself in the story of his own life. Audie became a star, but Terry remembers that fame was never truly satisfying for his father. The camera lights could never erase the pain that came from reliving battles again and again. Fame also brought pressure. The world wanted Audie to remain a flawless hero. Yet, he was a man dealing with post-traumatic stress long before the term PTSD was even recognized. He had frequent nightmares, struggled with depression, and kept a loaded pistol under his pillow for protection against enemies that no longer existed. His son would later admit that these behaviors were confusing as a child, but with time, he came to understand they were scars of war. The hidden truth is that Audie Murphy was never allowed to be ordinary. He was either the perfect soldier or the shining movie star, but rarely seen as a man with fears, doubts, and fragile moments. Terry has revealed that his father often avoided crowds and battled with deep loneliness, even when surrounded by admirers. The cheers from the public never filled the silence he carried at home. As a father, Audie tried his best, but the weight of his past often slipped into his home life. Terry recalls moments when his father's temper would rise quickly, not from malice, but from stress and sleeplessness. There were days of distance, when Audie seemed lost in his own world, staring quietly into the distance as though he were back on a battlefield no one else could see. Yet there were also moments of tenderness. Terry remembers fishing trips, laughter, and small lessons his father would pass down. Audie loved his children deeply, but he struggled to show it in traditional ways. His love was often expressed in gestures rather than words, protective, firm, and sometimes silent. His son now realizes those were the ways of a man who had seen too much to ever speak easily of emotions. Audie's story is often painted in black and white, heroism on the battlefield, stardom in the movies. But his son's perspective adds the missing shades of gray. It shows us that behind every medal was a memory of horror. Behind every film role was a man trying to escape his own mind. Behind every smile for the camera was a heart that beat too fast at sudden noises, too heavy with unspoken grief. This is only the beginning of what his son reveals. Because the story of Audie Murphy is not just about medals and movies, it is about how a father's pain, courage, and humanity shaped the family he left behind. Terry begins by describing the silence that hung over their home. His father rarely spoke about the war. When he did, it was brief, often clipped, and almost always heavy with emotion. As a boy, Terry did not understand why his father avoided certain subjects, why loud noises startled him, or why he sometimes disappeared into solitude. As a man, he came to realize that those silences were the unspoken language of trauma. The world celebrated Audie as a fearless hero, but his son saw the fear that lingered in small details. He saw how his father checked locks more than once, how his eyes scanned every room before sitting down, how sleep never seemed restful. These were not the behaviors of a man at peace. They were the marks of someone still fighting an invisible war. Terry has revealed that one of the hidden truths about his father was his struggle with depression. In a time when mental health was rarely discussed, Audie carried the burden alone. He even spoke publicly in the 1960s about what he called battle fatigue, urging the government to recognize the mental wounds of soldiers. This was long before PTSD was accepted as real. Audie's bravery was not just on the battlefield, it was in admitting his own pain when few others would. Yet even as he spoke for others, he continued to suffer privately. Terry recalls his father pacing late into the night, chain-smoking, restless, unable to find comfort. He would sometimes wake up drenched in sweat, shaken by dreams he never explained. For a child, these moments were frightening, but with time Terry understood they were echoes of combat, replaying in his father's mind. Another truth Terry shares is the financial struggles his father endured despite his fame. Hollywood roles came, but they never brought lasting wealth. Audie invested in various ventures, some successful, many not, and he often lived under pressure to provide. His son remembers that behind the glamorous image of a movie star, there were bills, debts, and worries that made life more difficult than outsiders imagined. Terry also reveals moments of warmth that the public never saw. Audie enjoyed simple pleasures, horseback riding, quiet walks, and evenings with his children. He loved the outdoors, perhaps because it gave him space from the chaos in his mind. These were the moments when the war hero disappeared, and the father emerged, fragile yet deeply human. The hidden truth also includes the emotional weight of fame. People expected Audie to always be strong, brave, and smiling. His son explains that this constant pressure wore him down. The gap between who he really was and who the world wanted him to be became a prison. Audie longed to be understood, but he was often trapped inside the myth of his own legend. Terry's revelations help us see that his father's greatest legacy is not only his medals or movies, but his humanity. He was a man who endured unbearable hardship, who gave everything to his country, and who still struggled with the cost of that sacrifice. His son's words strip away the marble statue and show us the man of flesh and blood, brave, yes, but also broken in ways that made his courage even more real. In May 1971, Audie Murphy's life ended in a plane crash at only 45 years old. For the world, it was the loss of a hero. For Terry, it was the loss of a father he was only beginning to understand. In later years, as he reflected on the life they shared, Terry chose to speak honestly about the truth. Not to tarnish his father's image, but to honor the man behind the myth. What Terry wants people to know is that Audie Murphy was not just a soldier or a star. He was a man who bore wounds for the rest of his life, yet still found the strength to protect, to fight for others, and to love in the only ways he knew how. That hidden truth makes his story more powerful than any Hollywood film could capture. For his son, sharing these truths is a way of giving his father peace. It is a way of saying that the legend was real, but so was the man. And in that man's struggles, fears, and unspoken battles, there is a story that speaks to every soldier, every family, and every person who has ever carried invisible scars. Audie Murphy's son finally tells the hidden truth, and in doing so, he gives us a gift. He gives us a chance to see a hero not as a distant figure of history, but as a father, a man, and a soul who walked through fire and never fully escaped its flames.